Hello and welcome to 64 Squares Official. The 2026 Esports World Cup brought together some of the strongest chess players in the world in a unique competitive environment with the games played under 10-minute time control. In this group Stage A encounter, two elite Indian grandmasters faced each other, Nihal Sarin and Arjun Erigaisi. Nihal is one of India's most dynamic young grandmasters and is renowned for his speed, tactical awareness, and ability to create complications across the board. Across the board was Arjun Erigaisi, a 2750 plus super grandmaster known for his powerful calculation, precision, and exceptional endgame technique. This was board 2 of round 1 and both players had plenty to prove. What began as a relatively quiet positional battle eventually transformed into a tense rook ending where one major mistake by Nihal completely changed the result. So let's go through the game move by move. Knight to f3 and d5. Nihal starts with the flexible knight to f3, avoiding an immediate commitment to a particular opening. Arjun responds with d5, taking control of the center. Now e3 and knight to f6. This is a ready opening quiet system. White prepares to develop the dark squared bishop while black develops naturally. Now b3 and bishop to f5. Nihal announces his intention to place the bishop on b2, putting pressure along the long diagonal. Arjun immediately develops his bishop outside the pawn chain before playing e6. Now bishop to e2 and e6. Both sides continue developing sensibly. Now knight to h4, attacking the bishop, and bishop goes g6. An interesting decision from Nihal. The knight attacks the bishop, forcing it to retreat to g6. White gains the bishop pair, but the knight has also spent time moving to the edge of the board. Now kingside castling and c5. Nihal castles. Arjun grabs more space with c5, establishing a strong central presence. Now bishop to b2 and knight to c6. White completes the fianchetto. Black develops the queenside knight and is already very comfortable. Now d3 and d4. This is an important moment. Arjun closes the center with d4, gaining space and restricting white's options. The position remains playable, but black has obtained a comfortable structure. Now e4, the first strategic turning point. Nihal pushes forward the e4, trying to build a strong central formation, but according to the evaluation, this gives black a slight advantage. The problem is that white's center looks impressive, but it can also become a target. Black has more space on the queen side and can begin attacking the structure. And now bishop to e7, Arjun calmly develops. There is no need to rush. Black's position is already easier to play. Now g3 and knight to d7. Nihal prepares to reinforce the center and perhaps reposition the bishop. Arjun's knight to d7 is a useful regrouping move, preparing to improve the knight and support future activity. Now knight takes g6 and h take g6. Black gets an open rook file. Nihal decides to eliminate the bishop. Arjun recaptures with the h-pawn, accepting double-looking kingside pawns in exchange for the open h-file. And bishop pair having already disappeared, the position is still roughly balanced strategically, although black has the easier game. Now knight to d2 and queen to c7. Black brings the queen to an active square. The queen supports the king side and keeps an eye on the center. Now a3 and g5. A very ambitious move. Arjun immediately gains space on the king side. The move also makes it harder for white to use the h4 square and gives black attacking possibilities. Now b4. Nihal responds on the queen side. He's trying to gain space and challenge black's c5 pawn, but this creates further structural tension. Now c captures and a captures and bishop captures. This is a strong tactical sequence. Black exchanges on b4 and then takes the pawn with the bishop. Arjun emerges with an active bishop and has created a dangerous advanced pawn on d4. This stage, black has the more comfortable position. Now knight to f3 and bishop to c3. Arjun's bishop comes to c3 and penetrating deep into white's position. This is exactly the kind of activity blacks want. Now bishop takes c3 and d takes c3. Nihal eliminates the dangerous bishop, but Arjun recaptures with the d pawn, creating a pass pawn on c3. That pawn becomes an important feature of the position. Now knight takes g5. Nihal grabs the pawn on g5. This is a practical decision. White needs counterplay. Now knight to d4, attacking the bishop. Excellent centralization. The knight jumps to d4, attacking key squares and becoming an important defensive and attacking piece. Now knight f3, knight takes f3 with a check and bishop takes f3. Arjun exchanges the active knight. After the recapture, the position becomes much more balanced. White's bishop is active, while black still has structural and positional resources. Now knight to e5, attacking the bishop. The remaining knight moves toward the center. Arjun continues to improve his pieces rather than forcing the position. Now d4, attacking the knight. A very strong move from Nihal. White finally challenges black's central dominance. The evaluation reaches approximately equal territory. Now rook to d8. Now white cannot take the knight because Arjun places the rook behind the d-pawn and increases the pressure. Bishop goes g2 and kingside castling. Both players complete their king safety. Now d5. Nihal pushes forward. The pawn on d5 gains space and restricts black's pieces. Now captures. The sender opens. After the exchanges, white has a strong advanced pawn and the position becomes considerably more dynamic. Interestingly, the valuation is now essentially equal. This is an important story of the game. Despite black's earlier advantage, Nihal has managed to fight his way back. Now queen to c5 and rook to e1, rook f to e8. Both sides activate the rooks. Nihal places his rook on the open e file and Arjun responds with rook f to e8, contesting the same file. Now rook to e3, a very interesting rook maneuver. The rook goes to e3, potentially allowing it to swing across the third rank. But this move also costs considerable time on the clock. Nihal is already down to around 5.5. Now knight to d7. Arjun improves his knight. Now rook to d3 and knight to f6. The rook moves again while Arjun's knight returns to f6. The evaluation now begins to favor black slightly, but there is still nothing decisive. And here comes d6. Nihal pushes the pawn to d6. The engine preferred queen to f3. This is a subtle moment. The pawn advance looks natural because white wants to create a dangerous pass pawn. However, it gives black additional defensive resources. The position remains approximately equal, but white's advantage has slipped away. And here comes b5. Arjun immediately creates counterplay on the queen side. This is exactly the right practical response. Instead of sitting passively and trying to stop the d-pawn, black creates a threat of his own. Now rook to a6 and b4. Nihal activates the rook. Arjun continues his queenside expansion. Now rook to c6, attacking the queen, and queen goes f5. The rook reaches c6 where it becomes very active. Arjun's queen moves to f5, keeping control over important squares and coordinating with the queenside pawns. Now h3 and a5. Black continues to gain space. The queenside pawns are becoming increasingly dangerous. Now rook to c7 and queen to e5. Nihal's rook reaches the 7th rank. This looks dangerous, but Arjun's pieces are coordinated enough to keep everything under control. Now bishop to d5, a tactical simplification, and queen to e1 check. Arjun finds an excellent forcing sequence. The queen checks on e1. Now queen takes and rook takes with the check. Nihal exchanges queens. Arjun recaptures with the rook. The game enters the rook and minor piece endgame. Now king goes g2 and knight takes d5. Arjun immediately removes the bishop. Now rook takes d5. Nihal recaptures. Now the position has simplified into a rook ending. And this is where the game becomes extremely instructive. Now a4, Arjun starts pushing his queenside pawn. The a-pawn is a major source of counterplay. White has active rook play, but black has dangerous connected pass pawn potential. The position is still essentially equal. And rook to f5. And this is the decisive moment of the entire game. Nihal plays rook to f5 and suddenly the evaluation crashes from approximately equal to around -3. The engine's preferred move was rook to b5. The difference is enormous. Now let's see why rook to f5 is such a problem. Nihal's rook needs to remain active against black's queenside pawns. By placing the rook on f5, white loses the ability to adequately control the 6th rank and most importantly allows black's rook to become extremely active. Arjun immediately sees the opportunity. Now rook takes d6. Black captures the dangerous d6 pawn. The once powerful pass pawn is gone and suddenly black's queenside majority becomes the dominant factor. Now rook f takes f7, another mistake. Nihal tries to generate counterplay with rook f to f7, but the best chance was a rook to h5. Nihal is desperately trying to activate his rook against black's kingside pawns. Unfortunately, the position has already turned sharply in Arjun's favor. Now rook to g6, a superb defensive and attacking move. The rook moves to g6 and keeps white's kingside pawns under control. Black's rook is now extremely active. Now h4 and b3. This is the key move. Arjun's queenside pass pawns start marching. White's h pawn is dangerous, but black's b pawn is much faster. Now h5 attacking the rook and rook to g5. Arjun keeps the rook behind alongside the advancing kingside pawns and continues to neutralize White's counterplay. Now h6, Nihal pushes again, but the engine preferred c takes b3. White had a chance to eliminate the dangerous b pawn. Instead, the h pawn continues forward, and now Arjun's pawn is only one step away from promotion. Now b2, the pawn reaches b2. Promotion is now an immediate threat. White's rook cannot simultaneously stop the b pawn and create enough counterplay. Now h takes g7 and rook to e8. Nihal takes on g7, hoping his pass pawn can become dangerous, but Arjun calmly plays rook to e8. The rook becomes active and the position is completely winning for black. White's kingside pawn is too slow. The p pawn is simply close to promotion, and it was in this position Nihal resigned the game. This game is fascinating because it was not a one-sided victory. For much of the middle game, Arjun had the more comfortable position, but Nihal fought back brilliantly. After d4, on move 21, the game became roughly equal. White then created a dangerous pass pawn on d6 and had active rook play. For a long time, neither side had a clear path to victory. Then came the decisive mistake rook to f5. That single move transformed an approximately equal rook ending into a winning position for Arjun. The key lesson is that in rook endings, activity is often more important than material or pawn structure. Nihal needed to keep his rook active against black's queenside pawns. Once his rook moved away, Arjun's pass pawns became unstoppable. d4, Arjun takes space and obtains a comfortable position. Nihal fights back and equalizes the position. And rook to f5, the decisive blunder. After rook to b5, White could have kept the game alive. Instead, rook to f5 allowed rook takes d6, eliminating White's dangerous pass pawn and giving black a winning endgame. The game demonstrated two very different phases. Arjun was initially more comfortable and generated strong positional pressure. Nihal then found excellent counterplay and successfully brought the game back to equality. But in the final rook ending, one inaccurate rook move was enough to change everything. Rook to f5 was the turning point of this game. Arjun's response, rook takes d6, was clinical. From there, his queenside pass pawn became the deciding factor, and Nihal could not generate counterplay quickly enough. A very instructive game about rook activity, pass pawns, defensive precision, and how quickly a seemingly equal endgame can collapse after one mistake. If you enjoyed this detailed game analysis, make sure to like the video, subscribe to 64 Squares Official, and turn on notifications for more exciting chess games, tournament analysis, and brilliant moments from the world's strongest players. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.